In the summer of 1973, Norman Jewison brought Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice's rock opera to the screen, filming across the deserts and ancient ruins of Israel with a cast of mostly unknown theater performers rather than established movie stars. That decision gave the film a raw, lived-in intensity that still holds up more than 5 decades later, and it also meant that the people who played Jesus, Judas, Mary Magdalene, and the rest of the disciples went on to live extraordinary and wildly different lives once the cameras stopped rolling. Some never escaped the shadow of the role that made them famous. Others walked away from Hollywood entirely and built careers nobody would have predicted. A few are still with us today, while others left this world far too soon. This is the story of what became of the men and women who brought Jesus Christ Superstar to life. Ted Neeley carried the impossible weight of playing Jesus himself, and in many ways, he never really put it down. Born in Ranger, Texas, in 1943, Neeley wasn't even the first choice for the role. Norman Jewison had considered rock stars like Ian Gillan of Deep Purple before turning to Neeley, who had understudied Jesus on Broadway and had built his reputation playing Claude in the stage production of Hair. Getting cast came down to a screen test at Pinewood Studios opposite Carl Anderson, the actor who would play Judas, and the two men became close friends almost instantly, a bond Jewison later said he wanted captured on camera. Filming in the Israeli desert was brutal. Temperatures climbed past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the cast endured long days under a punishing sun while trying to deliver performances that required both physical stamina and raw, emotional vulnerability. Neeley leaned into all of it, and the performance turned him into one of the most recognizable faces in movie musical history. What happened next is almost unheard of in Hollywood. Rather than moving on to other projects, Neeley kept returning to the role of Jesus on stage for decades, touring in productions of Jesus Christ Superstar well into his 70s, and effectively making a second career out of reprising the part that defined him. He also stayed connected to his old castmates, particularly Carl Anderson, right up until Anderson's death. Off-stage, Neeley built a quieter life with his wife, Leanne Granger, a former dancer from the production, and the couple raised a family together. As of 2026, Neeley is in his early 80s and still occasionally appears at anniversary screenings and fan events tied to the film, a living link to the production more than 50 years on. Carl Anderson's Judas is widely considered the emotional center of the film, and his story is one of the most bittersweet in the entire cast. Born in Cincinnati in 1945, Anderson brought a ferocious vocal power and aching humanity to a character who could easily have been played as a simple villain. Instead, audiences saw a man torn apart by conscience, and that interpretation reshaped how the role was approached in stage productions for years afterward. Anderson was also navigating a music industry and film landscape that offered limited opportunities to black performers in leading roles during the early 1970s, and his performance as Judas became a landmark precisely because he refused to let the part be reduced to a stereotype. After the film, Anderson didn't fade into obscurity. He built a genuine recording career, and in 1986, he scored a major mainstream hit with Friends and Lovers, a duet with Gloria Loring that climbed to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. He kept touring, kept performing, and kept his connection to Jesus Christ Superstar alive by returning to stage productions of the show over the years. Tragedy struck in 2003 when Anderson was diagnosed with acute leukemia, a discovery made almost by accident following a minor car accident. He fought the disease while continuing to perform when he could, and he passed away on February 23, 2004, just days shy of his 59th birthday. His death was felt deeply across the theater and music worlds, and Ted Neeley in particular has spoken openly over the years about how much he still misses his friend. Barry Dennen's portrayal of Pontius Pilate gave the film one of its most morally complicated figures, a man caught between political duty and private doubt. Dennen was born in Chicago in 1938 and had actually originated the role of Pilate years earlier, performing it on the original 1970 concept album before reprising it on Broadway, and then in the film. That history gave his performance a lived-in authority that came through clearly on screen. Dennen's career stretched far beyond Superstar. He appeared in Fiddler on the Roof and worked extensively in London theater, and later in life he found a second niche as a voice actor, lending his talents to projects like The Shining, as well as video games including World of Warcraft and Dota 2. His personal life was also notable for a formative early relationship. In 1960, well before either of them became famous, Dennen dated a young Barbra Streisand and played a significant role in helping shape her early nightclub act. He lived openly as a gay man during an era when doing so came with real professional and social risk, and he carried that lived experience into the nuance he brought to every role he played afterward. Dennen remained active in stage, screen, and voice work for decades. He passed away on September 26, 2017, in Los Angeles, at the age of 79, following complications from a fall. His death closed the book on one of the most versatile careers to come out of the original Superstar cast. Yvonne Elliman was only 21 years old when she stepped into the role of Mary Magdalene, and she brought a vulnerability and vocal clarity that made her performance one of the film's emotional anchors. Born in Honolulu in 1951, Elliman had actually been discovered by Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber themselves and cast in the role well before the film adaptation existed, first performing it on the concept album, and then on stage before bringing it to the screen. Her rendition of I Don't Know How to Love Him remains one of the most enduring musical moments of the entire production. Elliman's career took off well beyond Superstar. She became a genuine pop star in her own right during the disco era, scoring a massive hit with If I Can't Have You, which became one of the best-selling singles of 1978. Her personal life saw its share of upheaval, including 2 marriages that ended before she found lasting stability with her third husband. In 2017, at 65 years old, she faced a legal matter in Guam connected to alleged possession of a controlled substance while on a charity trip, a situation she resolved through legal proceedings and personal accountability. Rather than let that moment define her, Elliman largely stepped back from the spotlight to focus on her family, though she has continued to perform selectively and stay connected to music on her own terms. As of 2026, she is in her mid-70s, one of the few surviving lead performers from a film, living a relatively private life while occasionally re-emerging for interviews and tributes tied to the movie's legacy. Bob Bingham's booming bass voice made Caiaphas, the high priest orchestrating Jesus' downfall, one of the most intimidating presences in the film. Born in Seattle in 1946, Bingham had originated the role on the very first American concert tour of Jesus Christ Superstar before carrying it through to Broadway, a Paris production, and finally the film. What makes Bingham's story stand out from so many of his castmates is what he did after Superstar. He essentially walked away from show business. By the mid-1970s, Bingham had left acting behind entirely and took a management position at a zipper manufacturing company, settling into a quiet suburban life in Brewster, New York, with his wife, Idilcia, and their 2 children, Franklin and Yasmin. He would occasionally reappear for fan events and screenings tied to the film's anniversaries, always warmly received by devoted followers of the production, but he never sought a return to the entertainment industry. Bingham passed away on February 8, 2025, in Putnam County, New York, at the age of 78, following a period of declining health. His old friend and castmate Ted Neeley posted an emotional tribute after his death, calling him one of his dearest friends and noting how deeply Bingham had loved connecting with fans of the film over the years. His passing was a reminder of just how tightly this cast remained bonded across 5 decades, long after most of them had moved into entirely different lives. Josh Mostel took on the flamboyant, theatrical role of King Herod, delivering a performance defined by exaggerated comic energy that stood in sharp contrast to the film's more solemn tone elsewhere. Born in New York City in 1946, Mostel carried an especially heavy legacy into the role, as the son of legendary comic actor Zero Mostel, one of the most beloved performers of American stage and screen. That lineage brought both opportunity and pressure, and Mostel spent much of his career carving out his own identity separate from his father's towering reputation. He found consistent work in film and television for decades afterward, appearing in movies like Harry and Tonto, Sophie's Choice, City Slickers, Billy Madison, and The Money Pit, proving he had far more range than the one loud, comic role that first introduced him to audiences. Offstage, Mostel kept a relatively low profile, splitting time between New York City and a home on Martha's Vineyard, marrying 3 times, and raising children away from intensity of Hollywood attention. As of 2026, Mostel is in his late 70s, still living in New York, and remains one of the surviving members of the original film cast, occasionally connected to theater projects while largely enjoying a private life. Larry Marshall brought explosive energy to the role of Simon Zealots, the fiery apostle whose musical number is one of the film's most kinetic sequences. Born in Spartanburg, South Carolina, in 1944, Marshall built a career that, like Carl Anderson's, was shaped by the limited opportunities available to black performers in Broadway and Hollywood during that era. Rather than let those barriers stop him, Marshall doubled down on stage work, eventually earning a Tony nomination for his performance as Sportin' Life in a revival of Porgy and Bess, and he also appeared in films including The Cotton Club. Throughout his career, Marshall remained deeply committed to mentoring younger performers and pushing for better representation for black artists in theater, using his own hard-won success to open doors for others. As of 2026, Marshall is in his early 80s and continues to be involved in educational and theater projects that celebrate the legacy of black performers on Broadway, a fitting continuation of the advocacy that defined much of his career. Kurt Yagian played Annas, the calculating high priest working alongside Caiaphas, bringing a sharp, politically charged edge to the role. Born in Detroit in 1951, Yagian had trained extensively in opera and musical theater before landing the part, and he had actually worked his way up through the original Broadway production of Jesus Christ Superstar in smaller roles before eventually understudying both Judas and Pilate. After the film, Yagian shifted much of his focus toward music, working as a backing vocalist for major artists including John Lennon and Carly Simon. He continued to move between stage productions and studio work for years afterward, prioritizing craft over mainstream fame. As of 2026, Yagian is in his mid-70s and remains connected to music and occasional stage work, having built a quieter but steady career in the decades since Superstar first brought him to wider attention. Robert LaPone's role was smaller, credited simply as an apostle, but his career afterward became one of the most influential in American theater. Born in Brooklyn in 1946, LaPone trained at Juilliard before Superstar and went on to originate the role of Zack, the director character, in the original Broadway production of A Chorus Line, earning a Tony nomination in the process. He later co-founded the off-Broadway company MCC Theater, which grew into one of the most respected institutions in New York theater, producing acclaimed work for decades. LaPone also built a substantial television career, playing a recurring physician character on The Sopranos and appearing across shows like Law and Order and Gossip Girl. He was notably the older brother of Broadway legend Patti LuPone. LuPone passed away on August 27, 2022, at a hospice facility in Albany, New York, at the age of 76, following a 3-year battle with pancreatic cancer. His death was mourned throughout the theater community he had helped shape for half a century. Paul Thomas, credited under his birth name Philip Tubus, played the Apostle Peter, and his life afterward took one of the most unexpected turns of anyone in the cast. Born in Winnetka, Illinois, in 1949, Tubus had been a promising stage actor, having performed in Hair before landing his role in Superstar. But by the mid-1970s, he had transitioned into adult film, first as a performer and later as one of the most prolific directors in the industry's history, eventually helming hundreds of titles for Vivid Entertainment and earning induction into both the AVN and XRCO Halls of Fame. His path wasn't without serious trouble. In 1982, he was arrested and served time for smuggling cocaine, a setback he worked to rebuild from once he returned to his career. He remained married to his wife,